Hi everyone. So I got back a week ago, and over the last week it's really just been about tinkering. Haven't done any dedicated imaging sessions. I've just been playing around trying to sort a few issues, guiding and dome alignment, etc. And that's one area where I've had some success, is the dome. After however many months of owning it, I've eventually managed to get it to align to the telescope in all directions. Previously it was maybe only 80% of the sky that would sit correctly, and even then some of that it was sitting overlapping the telescope aperture. So I went back to basics, read all the manuals again, went through the forums, looked at various discussions, and of course everybody talks about the measurements for the alignment had to be perfect to get the slit to line up with the telescope. So I went back, scrubbed everything, got the tape measure out, and rechecked everything. So that's what we're going to take a quick look at today and where I made my mistakes. Alright, so the first thing I rechecked was the centre of the dome. So when I first built the dome, I didn't have this spare bit of swimming pool liner. I just used this to cover the foam because I can't get hold of any of these foam tiles at the moment. There seems to be a shortage of them, or they're asking stupid prices for them, so I've just used the swimming pool liner at the moment. When I built the dome, I had built the decking, and then I marked I had a 12 inch provision for a pier if I do want to punch a hole through in the future. So I marked the centre of that and drilled a hole through the centre of the dome, and I'd use that to draw the circumference for the dome so I could build the walls. So I went back and I checked. I dropped a line from the top of the dome to this black point that I marked on the floor, and then I drilled back up through the original hole that I had when I was doing the circumference, and fortunately it lined up perfectly with the black hole, and I put an Allen key, a spare Allen key through there just to mark it in the meantime. And then I went back round each of the wall plate panels, so you can see one of the wall panels here. I've got bays in here, so I don't actually have walls to measure to, but I've got all obviously the 7 or however many it is wall trusses that are screwed to the decking. So I went back and checked the centre point to each of these wall frames, and they were all ballpark 44 inches, so everything was pretty central there. So next up was to check the actual dimensions on the offsets. So you get east-west offset and the north-south offset, and this is where I made one of my first major mistakes. I'd used the centre post of the tripod down to the black mark and used that as the offset for east-west, north-south. However, I should have been using the right ascension declination axis crossing point, which is roughly here, as the offset from the centre of the dome. So I took that measurement and put that into the software. And then the other measurement which I'd got wrong, let me just pan the camera up a bit. So is the gem. So again, I'd used the wrong reference point to the centre of the optics. I'd used sort of this point here as the distance, and measured that. However, I hadn't factored in the guide scope, so I ended up having to factor in the total width of the external side of the guide scope, which gave me a centre point roughly another 5 centimetres up off the centre of the RASA, and then again I had to change the reference point for that offset down to where the deck and RA axis cross. So having put all that in the measurements, the east-west is only a couple of centimetres off, and put those new dimensions in. Unfortunately, everything's been perfect since. The dome will track nicely. Pretty much the centre of the aperture is in the centre of the slit, and when it's tilted over east or west, the dome is actually moving sufficient to factor in the guide scope, because that was one of the issues I had in the early days as well. The telescope was overlapping predominantly the guide scope, so we'd lose all the guiding, and then depending where it was pointing originally, it would also partially overlap the telescope itself. But now everything is absolutely working perfectly, and it doesn't seem to matter where I'm pointing in the sky. all the dimensions are correct. So that has made everything a lot easier. So certainly there was some lessons to be learned from there. Yes, the dimensions are critical, but not only that, is taking the right dimensions from the right reference points. So okay, so here's the settings. So this is the ASCOM device hub, and I'm in dome setup, and we can see I've got a 50mm positive offset, which means I'm slightly east, and then the scope position is 120mm north, so I've got a positive number in there. The up and down, so when I tilt the telescope onto 90 degrees, it's pretty much level with the opening of the dome, so I've just left that at 0. And then this was the revised gem axis, which is your offset between the centre of the optics and the centre of rotation, and then of course the dome diameter put in there. So let's just connect to the dome. We can see it's just initializing the shutter here, but that's not a problem. I'm not going to be opening the shutter just now while the sun's blaring, and I'm going to go for a spin. So here we can see I've already connected the telescope, so I've got CPWI running around in the background. I've connected the telescope, and the GPS is all connected up fine, so it knows exactly where it is. And it's currently parked in the home position, not on Polaris. That's not a problem. So if I flick back to the dome control, and I select slave to telescope, and you can hear the dome is now starting to move to align up with the telescope. So let me just move around the back here, and we can see she's pretty much bang on centre, so that's obviously the shutter would open here. And if we go to another target, let's go to Alderamin in the east, and we navigate around there. You can see the telescope's coming round. It'll find itself now. The dome's still slightly out, but it's not finished adjusting yet. And there we go. And we can see the aperture, main aperture, is pointing clearly out the slit, and also the guide scope has got plenty of room for seeing the sky. So if we just flick round to the west just to see the same thing, so if we go across to Regulus, telescope starts to track round. You can see the centre of the dome is still to follow. Still playing catch up. And there we have it. One up telescope and guide scope perfectly aligned with the slit. Alright, so you can see there is obviously a bit of a delay as the scope it finds its position and the dome catches up. And when you're using software, I haven't tried it so much in Nina. I'm still trying to get my head around Nina. I still predominantly use APT. But in APT, at least, when I go to a target and everything's moving, the plate solving will obviously try to work out where it is in the sky. But the APT software will quite happily fail to plate solve. It will wait 30 seconds and then it'll try again, which usually by the time it's gone for the second attempt, the dome's now aligned up with the telescope and it can see the sky fine. So the system handles that delay in the alignment. So that's pretty much it. That's all the good news for the telescope in the meantime, and we'll see you in the next one. So thank you very much for watching.